thank you for attending our event. It is a big honor for us to see you all today, and I hope also tomorrow. And I will start our online seminar, which name is The Impact of the War on Religious Life, a Focus on Ukraine, our two-day online seminar, and actually which is dedicated to anniversary, first and I hope the only anniversary of start of full-scale invasion, Russian invasion of Ukraine. Today it is quiet in Kiev, and 1 year ago it was not so quiet in Kiev, and yeah, we are here to discuss how this situation, how the war, how crises which are caused by war, how do they impact on religious situation in Ukraine. And we have a great team today, great speakers, and I hope we will listen super presentations very soon. But for starting our seminar, let me give a floor to our organizing committee participants from European Association for the Study of Religion and from Ukrainian Association. So I would like to give a floor to Knott for welcoming speech, please.
Доброго дня. Vitania. I'm Knott. I'm president of the European Association for the Study of Religions. And I just want to say very warm greetings to you all on this important occasion, this online seminar on the impact of war on religious life, with its focus obviously on Ukraine. It's truly a remarkable occasion, although it is in some ways an unwelcome one for the reasons that Ruslan has mentioned, because of course it occurs on the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a time when your country is still blighted, and the lives of ordinary Ukrainians, whether in Ukraine or further afield, are really blighted by this war. But the seminar is remarkable because your association, the Ukrainian Association of Researchers of Religion, one of the members of the EASR, was due to host our annual conference this year. But obviously, last year it became clear that for reasons of security, safety, and logistics, that this wouldn't be possible. That was very sad for all of us concerned that we had to come to that conclusion. And we thank the Lithuanian Society for the Study of Religions for stepping in to host and agreeing to host our conference later this year. But despite your disappointment at being unable to host us in Kyiv, and we know it is a disappointment for you, but despite being unable to host us in person, and despite all the really horrific challenges that have been brought on by the conflict, you, our Ukrainian colleagues, have nevertheless worked very hard to organize this online seminar on the impact of war in recognition of this anniversary. So on behalf of the EASR, I can say in earnest that it is we who are honored to support the seminar, and further that we continue, as we have really from day one of the conflict, we continue to hold you, our Ukrainian colleagues, in our thoughts, and indeed all the Ukrainian people. So as well as our Ukrainian friends, Ruslan, Liudmila and colleagues, I'd like to thank Jenny Berglund, the General Secretary of the EASR, who's been so active in helping to bring this event to fruition, not least of all in hosting the seminar from the University of Stockholm. So I'm going to hand over to Jenny for her comments and nevertheless wish you well for what I'm sure will be a very inspiring and informative seminar on this really timely and relevant theme. Dziękuję. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kim. And yes, I'm Jenny Berglund, then General Secretary of the EASR. And I remember very clearly when we in 2021 started to plan the EASR's annual conference in Kiev. The Ukrainian Association of Researchers of Religion made a beautiful video showing Kiev and the university. This video was also shown at our General Assembly meeting in Pisa 2021. I want to tell you that this video of beautiful Kiev has come to my mind many times during the past year. When watching the news about the horrors of wars, the video stands like a kind of a symbol in my mind for a future conference. Although this is the first time that the Ukrainian Association of Researchers of Religion hosts an EASR conference, it is not the last. Apart from looking forward to these 2 days, I also look forward to when we will meet in Kiev for your second conference. And finally, I want to express my deepest respect for the Ukrainian Association, which despite the challenges has managed to organize this event. But not only this, you have also managed to conduct research that we will hear more about despite the ongoing war. So good luck to you and us, and I want to hand over to Liudmila.
Okay, dear colleagues, dear friends, on behalf of the Ukrainian Association of the Researchers of Religion, and on behalf of all scholars and even citizens of Ukraine, I would like to thank you for your human and scientific solidarity, which you show by your participation in this seminar. Its holding on the anniversary of Russia's large-scale aggression against Ukraine is very symbolic, especially in the context of yesterday's vote of United Nations for a peaceful post-war plan for Ukraine, and ultimately for the all of Europe. Most countries supported Ukrainian propositions, and only 7 members states of the United Nations demonstrated their commitment, both voluntary and forces, to the aggressor Russia. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for your governments and your personally. Our life has changed radically after February 24th, 1 year ago, and so did the lives of millions of believers and their religious communities, which is the subject of our professional scientific interest. I hope for an open discussion around the issues raised in the concept of our webinar, thanks to which the world will learn more deeply about the connection between the current Russia-Ukrainian war and the religious life in Ukraine, about the status of religious freedom in Ukraine. We face great geopolitical challenges, which came in front of the whole world, that it has united in solidarity in its opposition to the totalitarianism and Russism. For this 2023, we planned another, you are right, Kim and Jenny, peace conference as the annual conference, but the war prevented our plans to see you all in a prosperous and peaceful Kiev. This year, with the support of our friends from Lithuania, thank you very much, who put their reliable shoulder at a critical moment, the conference will be held in Vilnius. But I am convinced that we will meet again in Ukraine after the victory, which we have no doubt about. Thanks to our fantastic, frantic support of the entire scientific community, especially Kim, Knott, and Yeni Berglund, who made this webinar possible and brought together in our virtual conference hall the famous leading experts in the study of religion, whom I invited to work for the glory of Ukraine, for the glory of United Europe, for all people against personified evil, Kremlin and Putin, for the good and prosperity of all. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this inspiring words. And yes, we had keynote speaker Viktor Yelensky, who had to present his view as the head of state service of Ukraine for ethnic affairs and freedom of conscience. And of course, Viktor Yelensky is a famous scholar. But as he has his duties in government, he cannot join us, unfortunately, today, because there are some presidential events also dedicated to the anniversary of start of this full-scale invasion. But we are happy to have with us a colleague from this state service, Vyacheslav Horshkov, who will present speech and the welcoming words and position of the state service, which makes deal with these changes in religious life in Ukraine. And then we will actually, Vyacheslav, if you are with us, please, the floor is yours, and you have time for welcoming speech.
Thank you so much. I am glad to congratulate the participant of this seminar on behalf of the State Service for Ethnic Affairs and Freedom of Conscience. Wars have always had a significant impact on religious life. This is especially noticeable on the example of the Abrahamic religions, under the influence of which European culture was formed. It is difficult to imagine that the text of the Old and New Testament could be composed in conditions of peaceful and carefree life. War always prompts a reflection of the nature of evil, the search for the causes of conflicts, ways of reconciliation, as well as the development of methods for building and maintaining a just peace. The biblical prophets gave us a picture of the future in which the nations will no longer learn war, but will study together the ways of the Lord. It is clear that this dream time will not come but by itself. This is something that all humanity should work hard on. In order to stop training for war anymore, we need to understand what war teaches us. In particular, the one that fell to our generation right now. A full-scale military aggression of Russia against Ukraine began a year ago, but this war itself has a much longer history. What is happening today is nothing to the continuation of Ukrainian struggle for its own independence, for its own subjectivity, for the opportunity to gain glory and honor for its own nation, and not for the Russian Empire. This war is difficult to understand outside the context of universal human struggle for dignity, personal dignity and collective dignity. But we in Ukraine are aware of this. In 1918, Ukraine became the second country after Finland to declare independence from Russia. At that time, the Ukrainian Democratic Republic tried to put into practice the principles of dignified coexistence of all ethnic and religious communities on its territory. I note that in 1918, the Ukrainian Democratic Republic was the only country in Europe whose constitution included an article on the protection of human dignity. However, 100 years ago, the Russian occupation prevented the development of a space of dignity in Ukraine. The restoration of Ukraine's independence in 1991 made it possible for our society to return to the path of development, but we have to go through the difficult path of liberation from the consequences of Soviet genocide in Ukraine, which turned us into a mass of people and deprived us of the opportunity to be a nation. This was emphasized in 1953 by the author of the term genocide, Raphael Lemkin, in his speech, Soviet Genocide in Ukraine. Russia's attempt to return Ukraine to its sphere of influence led to the Revolution of Dignity of 2013-2014. The victory of which was perceived as to treat to the existence of Russian imperialism. Then Russia dared to use the force of arms against Ukraine. This Russian war against Ukraine awakened national feelings among many citizens of Ukraine. It has greatly strengthened to demand for justice and effective love, which directly concern religious communities. I can testify that in the conditions of this war, the criteria of orthodoxy for religious communities of various directions became the attitude to Ukrainian struggle for its own independence and the ability to dialogue and cooperate with others for the common good. I sincerely hope that the understanding of this war by scientists and religious communities will make our world more peaceful and harmonious. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vyacheslav. And on my side, I would agree that it is really not only war for territories and for independence, but it is also war for way of life and war for civilizational for two types of building civilization, I'd say. And now our religious communities suffer not only of the shellings, but also they suffer. They suffer also of Russian trying to make Ukrainians live in religious sphere in Russian manner, I'd say, because we have, of course, different approaches to religious freedom in Ukraine and in Russia, and also actually we have different approaches to organizing even events in field of religious studies, I saw, for example, a few days, maybe about 2 weeks ago, event in Russia, which was dedicated to traditional values and how to prevent work of sects and so on. And because this approach for organizing religious life becomes more and more autocratic in Russia, and unfortunately also in areas of Ukraine which are under Russian rule now. So we really need to understand how to support Ukrainian believers and how to support this Ukrainian approach to organizing state-church relations, and not to become Russian kind type of this organizing of religious life. So colleagues, we have probably we will have some short gap between this our plenary session and first panel discussion, because we have not our keynote speaker, but maybe some of you is also would like to say some welcoming remarks. Please, maybe you have such an opportunity now. I mean some of participants. Or we can just move to our to some short about 20 minutes break, and then come back to first panel discussion.
Well, I suppose that does make sense, considering well, this is the way the situation is currently in Ukraine. The best laid plans of our best laid plans gets upended by the fact that most of us have obligations and responsibilities that involve the war. Well, perhaps I would just give a brief introductory remark on basically the study of religion in Ukraine right now during the war. For those of you who are interested, maybe 5 minutes, and then we can take the small break. So, as you know, the situation here is such that as Massimo Introvigne will tell us later, actually, in this very panel about religious groups, especially small religious groups, are special targets in the war, and as Per-Arne Bodin and Liudmyla Fylypovych will tell us this is due to the concept of the Russian world that has to sort of has this sort of all-encompassing. There's an all-encompassing ideology that explicitly does indeed concern religion. And and of course, the scholars of religion have been instrumental in keeping this ideology out of Ukraine since the very beginning of Ukrainian independence, new Ukrainian independence in the 1990s. The plenary keynote speaker, which is right now actually basically doing the same work that he's done in the 90s, but more intensively, Zelensky was actually instrumental in quite a few of the laws on freedom of religion that we have, and in the fact that Ukraine's policy on religion is explicitly welcoming to many smaller groups, to most of the groups that are banned in Russia, that Ukraine has built indeed a governmental policy that makes it explicitly resistant to this, to the singular attempt of the Russian Federation to keep control over its religious groups and over people in religion, who join religions groups. For those of you who don't know, the Russian policy on religion includes a policy of traditional religions. This policy of traditional religions, it means that every big region has one religion that's promoted by the government and protected by the government's laws, really. So for more Western parts of Russia, this would be Christian Orthodoxy of a certain kind, of the Moscow Patriarchy. For Central Asian parts of Russia, this would be a branch of Islam, and for the Far Eastern parts of Russia, that would be a branch of Buddhism. The point of doing this is that if you have one church that most people go to, you can subvert its leaders and gain access to very private information. Now, Ukraine's policy on religion was explicitly built to resist this sort of thing. And by that, we mean that we've always defended the smaller groups. We've had quite a few people moving again from Russia to us, the groups that were banned. And we've always taken a stand that actually links into the stance that the sociologists of religion, among whom, again, one of our speakers, the esteemed Massimo Introvigne, and the very esteemed Eileen Barker, who has also been instrumental in building this for us and for helping us with our modeling, and who I'm glad to see here. And so this is, of course, when the war came to a head, it hit the eastern regions, which were in fact our most religiously diverse regions, because the steppes and the mining towns of the Donbass and the Donetsk and the Luhansk region were home to most of our neo-Protestant groups, to many of our fringe Buddhist groups, and so on. Many of those people have been forced to move. Many of those religious groups and buildings have been damaged by the war. And the thing that Ukrainian scholars of religion right now are focused on, aside from helping these groups where we can, is also on documenting these sorts of things with the Religion on Fire project. And this webinar is really a part of the Religion on Fire project. So you'll hear some of the ongoing reports today. There have been there has been monitoring going on for the destruction of religious property, and of the effects and of the migrational effects and of the demographical effects of the war on religious groups. Studies are also beginning to appear on the impact of the war on religious beliefs, such as what sort of practices do people maintain during the war? How have they interpreted the events of the war in light of religion, and on, of course, what sort of lines of tension the war has had internationally. So this is the sort of work that Ukrainian scholars of religion are doing right now. Quite a few of those who are doing this sort of work are present here today, and please keep this in mind if you want to ask any questions, or about the facts of the war or about the projects themselves, really. I think that's the sort of introduction I wanted to give and to add to what our colleagues have said. Yeah, if there's any sort of questions that we should handle now, please go ahead. And if not, we'll see you guys in a bit.
So, hello, dear colleagues, dear friends. It is very joyful to see those who could come during these hours and stay together. Together with Kateryna, Zorya, we are going to be moderators of our first panel discussion. And with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the reality of ideological wars has returned. And the war of Russia, in the name of ideological great country construction, has become an open trial to rearrange the world by referring to a totalitarian ideology. And the ideology of war is tightly connected with perceptions of religion of war, the religion of victory, and both are intensively manifested in the public space in Russia. With some examples everyone knows, some examples could be legitimation of for Russia's war in Ukraine by promotion of the worldview in which notions of unique Russian history of core importance, the support of Russian Orthodox Church leadership for Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine, etc. And the expressions of such war ideology are widely used in propaganda in Russia and abroad. It therefore becomes of crucial importance to study political, religious, and other social actors who provide ideological and religious legitimation of the war and violence. The ways of resilience and fragility, to use the word of Nicholas Nassim Taleb, who talks about the systems which only get stronger from a crisis or stress, in a similar way as an immunization needs infection to develop, are also important in our studies. And today, in the first panel with the theme, the influence of religion on the war, myth, ideology, propaganda, we will discuss and deepen our understanding on the ways religion influences the war. And during almost 2 hours, 5 invited speakers with 4 speeches will discuss the appeal to religious ideologies, claims, and symbols as one of the elements of propaganda and mobilization during contemporary military conflicts. That appeal was visibly demonstrated and is still demonstrated in the Russian-Ukrainian war. The attention will be also put on the ways religious institutions function with the frameworks of authoritarian exclusivism and democratic pluralism social orders, and against the background of Russia's current invasion of Ukraine. And shortly about the structure of the panel, each speaker will have 15 minutes of presentation, of her presentation. A discussion together with questions answer session will be in the end of the presentations. The participants are free to post reflections, questions, and in the comments chat. In case if there are questions concerning clarification of the paper, 1, 2 clarification questions might be presented after each paper. First speaker of our panel discussion is Per-Arne Bodin from Stockholm University, and he will present a paper with the title "The Triad of Uvarov and the Russian War: Similarities and Differences." Per-Arne, the floor is yours.
The aim of my presentation is to give a background to the notion of the Russian world, that is Ruskiy mir, by comparing it to the triad of Sergei Uvarov: orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality. The ideological doctrine created and formulated in 1832 in opposition to the famous motto of the French Revolution. Uvarov was Minister of Enlightenment in the reign of Nicholas I and coined the triad as an ideological foundation for conservative and imperial Russia, as noted by Benedict Anderson in his book Imagined Communities. Uvarov is also known as the president of the Russian Academy of Science and the promoter of the study of Oriental languages. He is one of the dark and influential figures of the 19th century Russian Empire. I want more precisely to compare the triad with another odious notion of much later date, that is Ruskiy mir, Russian world, especially in its later formation around 2010, from around 2010. Its prehistory lies in the late 1990s in the articles of Piotr Shedrovitsky, whose Ruskiy mir consisted of the Russian-speaking immigrant population and its culture as an ongoing special intellectual force this being one of many Russian holistic ideas through the last 200 years. In this early phase, from 2010, it was also sometimes used in the same way as Francophonia in France, with both an including and post-colonial potential. The Russian world is also sometimes summarized in a triad encompassing faith, Russian culture, which includes the Russian language, and memory. What is common for both notions is the vagueness that makes them perfect for political and ideological manipulations, particularly for promoting imperial ambitions. The first part of the Russian world, triad, seems to be parallel to Uvarov's in its foregrounding of the Orthodox Church, but neither Uvarov nor the adherents of Ruskiy mir they don't seem particularly interested in issues of personal religious character. I will claim that both the triad and Ruskiy mir can be characterized as declarative orthodoxy or as declarative religion. In his first draft, Uvarov used the more general national religion. Uvarov composed his triad without any assistance from the church. Ruskiy mir is, on the contrary, a joint notion created and developed by the state and the Russian Orthodox Church. The mystical, individual, and moral components seem to be absent in both cases. Russian language and culture as an entity is perhaps the most important component in the modern triad, but is absent in the triad of Uvarov. Uvarov himself used French as his main language, and it seems that his triad was originally formulated in French and then translated to Russian. The Russian language was, however, also politically central for Uvarov, positioned against the Polish language. The Tsar, advised by Uvarov, closed the Polish-speaking University of Vilnius and opened the Russian-speaking University of Kiev. For Uvarov, the imperial content is expressed in the very vague notion of narodnost, a translation of the French nationalité, but for him implying the national essence of the empire. The Russian world claims the Russian language, Russian history, and a canonized historical memory as the foundation of the empire. Uvarov's rhetoric sometimes seems completely identical with that of Ruskiy mir, as can be understood from one quotation from an article of Uvarov from the 1840s. Russia's exclusiveness, messianic role, anti-Europeanism, and responsibility for withstanding the apocalypse, for being the katechon. And quotation from Uvarov: in the midst of the rapid decline of religious civil institutions in Europe, with a widespread dissemination of destructive concepts, in view of the sad phenomena that has surrounded us from all sides, it was necessary to strengthen the fatherland on solid foundations on which the prosperity, strength, and life for the people are based. To find the principles that make up the distinctive character of Russia and belongs exclusively to it. Together into one whole, the sacred remains of nationality, and on them fasten the anchor of our salvation. Fortunately, Russia has retained a warm faith in salvational principles without which it cannot thrive, strengthen, or live. The adversary for, end quote, the adversary for Uvarov was Western Europe, especially Poland, and the Ukrainian movement, beginning Ukrainian movement of independence. The triad was dynastic in its essence, intended to preserve the Romanov dynasty. Ruskiy can be seen as post-colonial, post-imperial in the essence. The attempt to recreate the cultural, linguistic, and political hegemony of the lost empire. Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, they form together, as it goes, the core of Ruskiy, which also reflects the similar notion, Holy Rus, which is used nowadays in the same geopolitical way. And to my conclusion, in both the triad of Uvarov and in Ruskiy, as understood today, there is a shortcut, or let us say, a vicious circle between the components and between the two triads. But the remaining commonality in both is the urge for geopolitical power and political dominance, whether it be Russian Empire or Russian Federation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any brief questions to Professor Per-Arne Bodin?
I don't see the questions. I suggest to move forward. Okay, Lena Ross, one short question. Yes. Clarification type question. No? Yes. Okay, so we don't see them. Thank you, Per-Arne Bodin. Our second speakers are Liudmyla Fylypovych and Oksana Horkusha from H.Skovoroda Institute of Philosophy of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. And they will present a paper with the title Ruskiy and Ukrainskiy svit, Ontological, Anthropological Antagonists. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, I ask Oksana to help me with our presentation, and I will read and she will show our presentation. Okay. The question raised by Viktor Yelensky in the title of his keynote speech, then what are we fighting for? Freedom of consciousness versus religious persecution in the Russian-Ukrainian war, actualized the axiological cause of the Russian-Ukrainian war. The antagonistic opposition of freedom of consciousness and religious persecution declared by Yelensky coincide with our position. We propose to supplement and expand the understanding of these war courses through the analysis of the ontological and anthropological antagonism of two worldview, mental matrix, two ways of life, two worlds. But before our report, one remarks. You probably noticed that the title of the report does not include the English translation, the word world. Our decision not to translate, but to transcribe the titles of these two worlds, is due to the fact the English word world is the same for both notions and does not reflect the essential specificity of each of them. Without delving into the semantic, the word mir, which has two meanings. The first as a state of calmness, peace, harmony, and absence of enmity, war, which corresponds to the English word peace. And the second is a community of the people in the certain space, which corresponds to the English world, the earthly state of human existence. Let's clarify this world according to our tasks. In the paradigm of Russian world, mir is a properly arranged reality. According to their scheme, world is a space in the center of which there is a Kremlin, the Russian Federation, surrounded by the enemies. Therefore, the main idea of Russian mir, Ruskiy mir, is to umirotvorit, appease this space, bring peace, calm the warring parties, to drive every element of reality into the system matrix. Svit, Ukrainian svit, translated from Ukrainian as world, and means the space where Ukrainians live peacefully. Their space is ordered, prosvitlenny, enlightenment, by the mind in which a person with consciousness can freely self-determine. And back to our text, careful researching the ideas, concept, theories that are embedded in the concept of Rusmir or Ukrainian svit, tracking the forms of their realization shows the incompatibility of these two worlds. It is clear to us that Ruskiy mir is a pseudo-historiographical myth and ideological concept of justification for the imperial ambitions and expansive aggressive activities of the Kremlin. Ukrainian world, Ukrainskiy svit, is a worldview universe of Ukrainian consciousness. Was the clash of these two worlds inevitable? It's a difficult question to answer. It's necessary to admit the opposition of these worlds has always been. It became considerably obviously in the 1299 when the administrative center of Cathedral of Kiev Orthodox Metropolis was transferred to Volodymyr Knyazma and later in 1325 to Moscow. It was an actual separation of Moscow kingdom from Kievan Rus. And since that time, the idea of the secondariness and the affiliation Moscow from Kiev has bothered Muscovites. They constantly sought to prove their originality, superiority, historicity, primacy. And you ask how they do that. Self-affirmation took place through the humiliation of others and the privatization of foreign territories, history, culture, etc. All the time, we Ukrainians were those who were liberated from our identity and the values-based the Ukrainian world, which we close freely. For 700 years, Muscovites have denied our right to our identity. If it is possible for them to correct us, meaning to make Russian out Ukrainians, they have decided to destroy us by turning into Mankur slaves. This historical process of correction is going on now. According to the Yale University, more than 6,000 children have been removed from Ukraine without the consent of their parents, who are already being re-educated in 43 Russian camps from Crimea to Siberia, from Moscow to Magadan. To prove that Ruskiy mir and Ukrainskiy svit are antagonistic worldview discourses because they contain incompatible ontological and mutual contradictory anthropological models, we believe that it makes sense to walk through the map of this world according to the dichotomous principle. Ukraine does not exist in the ontological matrix of the Ruskiy Mir. Likewise, Ukrainians should not exist. According to the Ruskiy Mir paradigm, Ukraine is only the rebellion territory on the outskirts of the Russian Empire, a sub-state, a fake state, historical misunderstanding, and Ukrainians are only imperfect, damaged, incorrect Russians. Instead, Ukrainian exists as an independent state, and Ukrainians as a full-fledged political nations of free citizens. The ontological model of the Ruskiy Mir interprets the world as the struggle between good and evil, where the period of good is Ruskiy Mir, or Orthodox civilization, centered in Moscow, and the container of evil is the entire multi-phase global world, the opposite to the totalitarian despotism of the Kremlin. The ideal system is the centralized one, subordinate to the will of the dictator, who is the personification of a divine of blessing. Putin was sent to us by God, but indeed, he is the personification, not the good, but the most sacred animal instincts for the oppressed population. Instead, the ontological model of Ukrainskiy svit perceives the world as a multifaceted reality in which one of the many loci is the ecosystem in the wide sense of Ukraine. The value of freedom is declared as a basic one in each of two worldwide maps. However, freedom is understood not only differently, but also mutually contradictory, and it is implemented in different ways and with different goals. For Ruskiy Mir, the carrier of freedom is system, while for Ukrainskiy svit, it's a free, responsible person. In the ontological model, Ruskiy Mir, freedom is understood as a negative connotation, as independence from the world global system. Freedom here is a property of the system, the Russian state, the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation, personified by a spokesperson such as Tsar, General Secretary of Communist Party, leaders, president, and so on. Such freedom is the actualization of the will of dictator Ivan Grozny, Peter I, Stalin, Putin, in favor of whom the people renounce their subjectivity and harness themselves to the yoke of the obligation to sacrifice themselves in the name of the prosperity of the system of the impersonal whole. As for individual human freedom, it is also understood in negative perspective as the unconditional service to the system. Individual freedom is a threat to the totalitarianism because it impedes of the implementation of the Russian sacred mission to fight against global evil. For Ukrainian svit, for Ukrainian world, the value of freedom is fundamental for the both ontological and anthropological models. Here, freedom is understood in its positive connotation. Freedom not from, but freedom for, creating something new, better, more comfortable, fairer. It is an integral property for every effective conscious person. Love is a creative force of life, and free personality become the driver of freedom and unifying force. Rada, Toloka, Maidan, Sich are the basic models of the social coexistence, peculiarity in Ukrainians. For Ukrainians, such an organization of public life was inherited by the ancient Ruskiy, not Russians, and Cossacks. Freedom and dignity of the individual responsible for family and home for key value of Ukrainian model. Such a person is at the same time a protector and is a master for care and cultivation his world. There follows the соборноправность, the synodality-based governance. Thanks to Archimandrit Kirill Gavarun, he helps me to translate this соборноправность, and democracy of the confessional form of Ukrainian organization. We observe the significant role of believers in the religious life of Orthodox, Greek Catholic, Protestant of various denominations, Muslims of Ukraine. So, freedom, dignity, responsibility in the paradigm of Russian world, Ruskiy Mir, attributed of the system prescribed to it by its author, demiurge, higher personalization, the king, imperator, dictator, and so on. In the Russian ontological model, the system is presented as a depersonalized force. It because of its owner, an arbitrary despot who embodies of more sacred animal instincts of the crowd, greed, hatred, and so on. Instead, in paradigm of Ukrainian world, Ukrainskiy svit, these values are integral properties of the personality. Every individual person as co-participant in the event of Ukrainian's life and multi-voice civil community. We see the antagonism of the ontological and anthropological worldview models of Ruskiy Mir and the Ukrainskiy svit in the following. The first, both models claim the one valid locus Ukraine, but for Ruskiy Mir, modern Ukraine is only the territory with different resources. For Ukrainskiy svit, it is a real home, a cherry orchard near the house. The word famous our portrait Taras Shevchenko. The second, they both are based on the same historical events, which, however, are interpreted differently. For Ruskiy Mir, Human Rus is the cradle of the united Russian people, which the Russians are now rescuing the sacred basis for the Russian Empire. The baptism of Rus by Volodymyr is the source of imperialism as an argument for justifying the civilization mission of the Muscovites. Any historical events is defined in the imperial chauvinist discourse. Instead, in the paradigm of Ukrainskiy svit, historical events are a living experience collected in the consciousness of the people from the multitude of individual valid, truthful testimonies inscribed in Ukrainian cultural narratives. The third, teleological vectors are crucially different. For Russian Mir, the vision of the special civilization mission of this world for all mankind at the global level through the establishment of the dictators of this global entity, of the subordination of the entire world system to the creation scale defined by it. But for Ukrainians, construction, cultivation of a comfortable home for free correspondent owners of Ukrainian world. I could continue this comparison between Ukrainian and the Russian world, but maybe I note as one of the last. The indicated discourse are accompanied by opposite emotions of the activity, Ruskiy Mir, or influence of Ruskiy Mir and Ukrainian svit. For Ruskiy Mir, the dominant emotion is hatred of others and everything different from Russia and Russians. Hatred of Ukrainian world and Ukrainians, which manifested itself in the illogical atrocities committed by the Russian invaders in Ukraine. Ukrainian svit is based on love for one own and for living things in all their diversity. The tragic cases in Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol, Kharkiv, and other cities and villages of Ukraine, the treatment of the prisoners prompted us to think deeply about the nature of this hatred. We understood that this is a consequence of the small carrier's own complex of inferiority to the great Russian world civilization, in order to prove to themselves and others that they do exist and have at least some power over the enslaved. The Russians compensate for their subject worthlessness with maniacal malice and hatred for the subjectivity of the free Ukrainian citizen. Why are they things as they are? Because in the discourse of a Russian world, everyone is only the cog and the integral functional unit of the grand system. This strategy of the corresponding Grand Russian or denazification is desired to deprive Ukrainians of identity that make us free individuals. What impudence is it? Ukrainians live their own lives and they live better than Russians. The invaders were very much surprised about that they were that we have asphalt roads in countrysides, gas, electricity, civil life in village shows. If we don't have all those things, let's destroy theirs. Did you listen to the intercepted conversation of the Kremlin invaders with their relatives? The borders of anthrocides, cruelty, practicality, stealing everything from the washing machine, microwaves to children with toys and dishes. Moreover, it seems they didn't even know Russian, as they used only full language. In the territory covered by Ruskiy Mir, simulacrum, not Russian, not really, but simulacrum Russian Mir, person's freedom, dignity, creativity is devalued. A human being is worth nothing. Therefore, man and woman can be killed like an animal. Anyone who retains basic existential humanistic Christian values becomes potentially dangerous and is declared as an enemy. Therefore, on the outer borders of Russian world territory, Russians are always surrounded by fierce enemies. And the last thing we want to draw your attention for today is the difference between Russian Mir and Ukrainian svit, which is well illustrated by the actual situation with the freedom of religion in the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Religious freedom, to which Ukrainian denominations are accustomed as an attribute of normal social coexistence, is immediately cancelled with the occupation of Ukrainian territory by Russian troops. In any occupied town and village, Moscow Patriarchate turns into the Russian Orthodox Church, and other denominations, especially those clearly identified as Ukrainian, are subjected to the discrimination. There are known cases of the murder of clergymen, torture and combativity. Denominations that are not amenable to total worldview control from Russian Orthodox Church are pushed out to the occupied territories. In the Russian Federation, the correct interpretation of event is given by the voice of Russian Orthodox Church only. All other denominations have the right to develop this correct Russian Mirovska rhetoric in their religious sermon. We can clearly see how representatives of different denominations in Russian Federation silently and unanimously support both Kirill's and Putin's policy. Even Muslims, they declare a holy war against Ukraine and send their loyalties to kill Ukrainians near Kyiv, Mariupol, and other cities, and in other cities, motivating these by the need for liberation of Holy Russian, for Muslims, Holy Russian, from some mystical external evil forces. That is obviously to dictate of the Russian Mirovska paradigm over this diversity of the religious organization. And the last conclusion, ontological and anthropological models of Ruskiy Mir, Russian world, reconciled world, the world is a reconciled conquest, a defeated reality in the Ruskiy Mir paradigm, and the Ukrainian world, Ukrainskiy svit, enlightenment world, a world illuminated by the light of the reason and life, are contradictory. The presence of a declaration of universal human values, life, freedom, dignity, love, etc., does not mean the sameness of the understanding and real implementation. The evaluation criterion scale is different here. It is formed by various ontological, anthropological matrices mentioned above. What is considered a manifestation of freedom, dignity, love, goodness, truth, the meaning of life, and the proper state of society by the representatives of Ruskiy Mir is radically different from how we and the entire modern civilization world understand it. The Ukrainian world, Ukrainskiy svit, is fully compatible in ontological anthropological parameters with worldview discourses of modern democratic countries in which persons' freedom and dignity, a free and responsible citizen, is an indisputable attribute of equal democratic coexistence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Fylypovych and Horkusha. As we can see, there's already a discussion is already beginning in the Commons, but it's rather theoretically dense discussion. So we'll take that after the rest of the colleagues have spoken. So
Thank you, Liudmila and Oksana, for detailed presentation of Ruskiy Mir and Ukrainskiy svit. And our third speaker is Massimo Introvigne from the Center for Studies of New Religions, CESNUR, and he will present a paper with the title Russian Anti-Cult Conspiracy Theories and the War in Ukraine. Massimo, please.
Thank you. We have seen in the last few months several acts of sabotage and mysterious fires destroying military and civil facilities inside the territory of the Russian Federation. And Ukraine has not explicitly claimed the attacks, and originally Russian authorities have explained away the events as accidents. However, as these so-called accidents multiplied, the FSB has adopted the theory originally advanced by anti-cult organizations that sabotage and terrorist attacks are conducted in Russia by cults directed from abroad by the American and Ukrainian intelligence services. For example, on August 15, simultaneously in 6 different Russian cities, churches and private homes of a Pentecostal church based in Latvia and called New Generation have been raided by the FSB, and dozens of members have been arrested. Both the FSB press releases and the main Russian anti-cultists, including Alexander Dworkin and his deputy Alexander Novopashin, who appeared in television to support the raids, explained that New Generation operated cells engaged on sabotage activities on behalf of Ukraine. Paradoxically, New Generation is controversial in Latvia because in the past it has supported Putin and Patriarch Kirill's anti-LGBT policies, and recently has been on the same side of several pro-Russian organizations in refusing COVID-19 vaccination. However, New Generation committed the capital sin of sending missionaries to Russia to convert Russian Orthodox to its faith, and as a consequence it was stigmatized in Russia as a cult and reacted by siding against the Putin regime after the invasion of Ukraine. While it is both a prosperous and a controversial church, that it has the desire or the capabilities to carry on activities of sabotage in Russia is not believable. On September 6, 2022, the FSB conducted simultaneous operations in 46 regions of the Russian Federation, arresting 187 alleged members of two connected Satanist cults, also accused of conducting sabotage operations on behalf of Ukraine and the United States. They were called Columbine Satanism and MKU, Maniacs Murder Cult. There is only one problem with these Satanist organizations: they do not exist. Columbine Satanism has been denounced as the most dangerous cult in the world, I quote, by a Russian anti-cultist called Roman Silantiev, who has received both academic and governmental appointments. The names, of course, come from the high school massacre in Columbine, Colorado in 1999, where two teenagers killed 12 students and a teacher. The massacre at Columbine certainly happened, but Silantiev claims that it was the result of the cooperation between Anton LaVey's Church of Satan and the CIA, whose experiments aimed at creating young killers and deploying them to wreak havoc in various countries. Later, Silantiev added the Ukrainian intelligence to the number of conspirators. There is no evidence that the Columbine killers were in contact with the Church of Satan, nor that they belonged to any cult. Maniacs Murder Cult was the name of a small group that existed for a few months on the social media Vkontakte, which is popular in both Russia and Ukraine, and never had more than 13 subscribers. Assuming the FSB was not behind it from the beginning, it was operated in Ukraine by a young black metal fan called Yegor Krasnov, who was arrested by the Ukrainian police for stabbing a man in the street. The FSB and Silantiev, however, have claimed since 2021 that Krasnov is not in jail, but is used by the Ukrainian intelligence to mastermind a transnational terrorist Satanist cult that may also include supporters of Alexei Navalny, and indeed Navalny supporters were arrested as Satanists on September 6, 2022. So it appears that the Columbine Satanism and Maniacs Murder Cult are just labels conveniently used by the FSB with the propaganda support of anti-cult activists such as Dvorkin, Novopashin, and Silantiev to arrest dissidents and find a convenient explanation for the accidents destroying strategically important buildings in Russia. The use of cults as scapegoats by Russian authorities to explain their failures in Ukraine is not new. The most persistent argument of Russian propaganda about Ukraine, an argument I see used daily by Russian propaganda in Italy, for example, is that the war was not started in 2022 by Russia, but in 2014 by Ukraine and the United States, when what Russians called a coup hosted pro-Putin President Viktor Yanukovych. The coup, with propaganda claims, compelled Russia to react by invading Crimea and later Donetsk and Luhansk, eventually leading also to the 2022 war. I will not spend time with this audience explaining why this is totally untrue, but I would focus on the alleged cult connection, which is also part of the Russian propaganda. This propaganda is one of its center on a Ukrainian politician called Arseny Yatsenyuk, an economist who was prime minister for some time after Maidan, and after which the government of Yatsenyuk collapsed because of its contrasts with President Poroshenko in economic matters. Now, immediately after Maidan, Alexander Dworkin, who is the main leader of the Russian anti-cult movement, gave a conference in Serbia where he explained that Maidan was the result of a conspiracy of cultists behind whom was the CIA. What literally Dworkin said in Serbia was, quote, behind the Ukrainian crisis, there is a secret plan of a group of religious cults and sects in which the political leadership of Ukraine itself is participating, end quote. At the end of this conspiracy, Dworkin said, was Yatsenyuk, who was, quote, controlled by the CIA through Scientology. Later in the same month, Dworkin had to admit he had no evidence that Yatsenyuk was Scientology, but he still existed. He took courses of Scientology. And he said, quote, this, I emphasize, is the most important thing in the story with Yatsenyuk. He took courses in Scientology. So they probably have a folder of compromising evidence on Yatsenyuk. Accordingly, is still Dworkin speaking, he is held tightly by his most sensitive places. They can't control me very easily. It seems to me that this situation is even worse than if he were an open member of Scientology. Then it will be clear who he is and what can be expected from him. Yatsenyuk is a man whose file is kept by a very tough foreign totalitarian organization, and as many experts note, with ties to the CIA. It is clear that such a person is an absolute puppet, and he will do whatever he is told. In another interview after Maidan, Dworkin insisted that Scientologists had, quote, put Yatsenyuk into a trance and pooped out all compromising information about him. So he passed under the control of Scientologists. Scientology has concluded a secret agreement with the US CIA. Therefore, it is clear under whose control Yatsenyuk is. It is interesting that even anti-cultists in the United States, such as Tony Ortega, is one of the most vicious anti-Scientology activists, investigated the matter, and they didn't find any evidence that Yatsenyuk was a Scientologist, or that, as Dworkin said in another interview, Alina Steele, the sister of Yatsenyuk, who lives in Santa Barbara, California, was herself as Scientology. But that doesn't prevent Dworkin to continue with his story to this very day, and only it has expanded his narrative about Maidan, which more recently he has discussed as a cooperation between Scientologists, Satanists, Pentecostals and Uniates, meaning member of the Greek Rite Catholic Church. Just in 2022, after the start of the so-called special operation, Alexander Novopashin, an Orthodox priest in Novosibirsk, and Dworkin's deputy in the Federation of Russia anti-cult organization Ratsirs, gave an interview to the Komsomolskaya Pravda, where he claimed that the conspiracy in Ukraine had started even before 2014. Cultists, he says, primarily neo-Pentecostal and neo-pagan organizations began to be created in Ukraine from the beginning of the 1990s, in which tens of thousands of Ukrainians were fraudulently involved. Plans had been prepared by Western and American experts who are pretty well versed in destructive activities, until in 2014, thousands of the members of the cults came to the square in the center of Kiev and set in motion the events that made the 2014 and 2022 Russian operations necessary, end quote. And Novopashin said that these operations were defensive moves since Ukraine was infiltrating Russia with cultist terrorist cells, I quote, ready to kill, destroy, and even drink the blood of Russian babies. Silantiev, in a different interview, added that in addition to children, and I'm not making this up, I can send to you the link, even Russian cats, I say cats, are at risk since they are ritually sacrificed by Ukraine-directed cultists. In conclusion, these are not merely curiosities. Hundreds are in jail in Russia, accused of being part of cults engaged in sabotage on behalf of Ukraine. Recently, it has even been alleged that the Jehovah's Witnesses are preparing a coup to oust Putin. Dworkin, Novopashin, and Silantiev are not unimportant figures in Russia, although they are unleashed when needed and can be criticized when they become an embarrassment for the government. Dworkin was appointed in 2009 as head of the Expert Council for Conducting State Religious Studies at the and Silantiev as his deck and should be liquidated. So this may seem crazy people, but even crazy people have an audience in Russia in these years, and crazy people are, and the inherently crazy theory about cults are part and parcel of Russian propaganda. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Introvigne. And yeah, as we can see, there is again a rather theoretically deep discussion in the comments that we'll take later. And now for our last speaker, Rasa.
Thank you, Massimo, for a dive into Russian anti-cult conspiracies. And our last speaker of the panel is Kirill Hovorov from St. Ignatius College, University College, Stockholm. He will present a paper with the title, The Ukrainian War and the World Council of Churches. Kirill, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, greetings to everyone. It's so good to see old friends, new faces. Thank you for this opportunity to address a topic which has become a part of the discussions, of the recent discussions, how the churches, particularly the Russian Orthodox Church, is related to the World Council of Churches as the largest ecumenical organization, and how it uses the WCC. This topic is also important, I think, for the Nordic countries, which are the churches in those countries are the main sponsors of the WCC and of the ecumenical activities. That's why I think it's important to have such a discussion in this context. And of course, I'm addressing you as a CIA agent, as I've been also, branded by the Russian observers. And thank you for Professor Massimo for your presentation. It was really inspiring. It seems to be like crazy people promote crazy ideas, but it's now we see it's happening. It's happening on the scale of the entire nation. Like if you watch the recent address of Putin to the federal gathering of the Russian Federation, it was packed with those conspiracy theories, also allusions to religion, to the assumed ostensible attempts of the West to destroy the Russian spirituality and to use various demonic forces. Actually, we can observe how, and I make this kind of remark on top of the previous presentation in order to pass then to my topic. We see that essentially Putin, and not just him, even more Medvedev, the former president before Putin, the placeholder for Putin in the years 2008 through 2012, they started developing a sort of theology. They slipped to theology, which is very strange. They're very secular people, and they never had any relationship whatsoever to to religion or theology. And now they incline to use theological arguments in support of their standpoints and their policies. This is a very interesting tendency, which needs to be elaborated upon. This tendency means that the rational or secular arguments have been exhausted for them. They don't work anymore, even for themselves. They need some extra secular, so to say, metaphysical arguments to justify what they are doing and what they are promoting. A statement which was published by Dmitry Medvedev some time ago, several weeks ago, on his Telegram channel has become really viral. I don't know if you're aware about that statement, but I'd like to quote it as an example of this kind of political theology or metaphysical approach to the war that he promotes, and Putin actually concurs with Medvedev. So the statement says, let me just so it says, we are fighting, I quote Medvedev, we are fighting against those who hate us, who ban our language, our values, and even our faith, who spread hatred towards the history of our fatherland. A part of the dying world is today against us. This is a bunch of crazy Nazi junkies, folks drugged and intimidated by them, and a large pack of barking dogs from the Western Kennel. Well, he uses really strong language. With them, there is a motley herd of grunting guilds and narrow-minded Philistines from the collapsing Western Empire, with saliva flowing down their chins from degeneration. They have no faith and ideals except for obscene habits invented by them, as well as standards of doublethink. They deny the morality bestowed on normal people. Therefore, by having risen against them, we have acquired sacred power. So Medvedev refers to the sacred power, and it seems that Putin follows him. I just finished with Medvedev and then pass to Putin briefly. So Medvedev continues, we have the opportunity to send all enemies to the fiery Gehenna. Here he apparently alludes to the nuclear weapons. But this is not our task. We listen to the words of the Creator in our hearts and obey them. These words give us a sacred purpose. The goal is to stop the Supreme Lord of Hell, That is a very funny language that he uses. So the goal is to stop the Supreme Lord of Hell, whatever name he uses, Satan, Lucifer, or Iblis. And in the latter case, Medvedev alludes to the Muslim demonology. Somehow in tune with this kind of political or theopolitical thinking of Medvedev, Putin embarked on the same sort of rhetoric and argumentation. For example, quite notoriously, just a few days ago, on February 21st, in the mentioned address to the federal gathering, the upper chamber of the Russian parliament, Putin explicitly condemned the gender-neutral God. Well, in other words, he assumed that God has a gender. Of course, while Putin meant something like gender ideology, he wanted apparently to address the discussions about whether the gender-neutral language should be applied to God. But he did it so kind of without nuances and elaboration that he implied that God is a man, apparently, and well, which is a very awkward theology, of course. Also, and just next day after that, on February 22nd, meaning 2 days ago, Putin addressed a huge crowd in Ruskiy. They had a meeting in support of the war. And Putin again tried to propose to promote some kind of theology. For example, he used theology to explain the meaning of the word fatherland, Отечество. For Putin, Отечество, fatherland, which is, well, in the Western languages, has the connotations with Vaterland, the German Nazi concept of Vaterland. So for Putin, fatherland is intrinsically connected with God the Father, to whom we pray in Lord's Prayer. And Putin explicitly made this reference to Lord's Prayer, "Our Father who art in heaven." And he explained that what we believe about God the Father extrapolates to what we should believe about the fatherland. And he also stressed that the concept of fatherland is holy and mystical. So this kind of mysticism is now underpinning Putinism, this ideology that he promotes. And of course, he relies very much on the concepts, on the support of coming from the Russian Orthodox Church. The Russian Orthodox Church, it's now a common language, a common wisdom. No one needs to be very much convinced that is quite complicit in this war, in promoting the war. Just a recent example of such an understanding of such a awareness about the complicity of the Russian Church in supporting the war came from the recent statement, which was published just a few days ago by the Bishops' Conference of the Church of Norway. I know these conferences are co-organized with the assistance of the Norwegian partners, and that's why I think this statement is quite important for our conversation. So the conference of bishops, of the Lutheran bishops, of course, of the Church of Norway, in its preamble stated, and I want to quote it: "We bishops of the Church of Norway will not be silenced while the war is ongoing. We cannot accept that the war is supported by the leadership of the Russian Orthodox Church. It is a war of aggression that violates international law, is ethically illegitimate, and contravenes fundamental values of our Christian faith." Well, the conference went as far as endorsing the efforts of the Norwegian government in helping Ukraine, including supplying weapons. Well, the statement does not explicitly say about the weapons, but it implies this, and it states, we support that Norway, with its growing financial resources, gives binding and comprehensive promises of support for years to come. This must be additional to increase support to people in poverty and need in other parts of the world who are also affected by this war. In the end, the statement utters clear accusations against the leadership of the Russian Orthodox Church, and I quote again, we look with horror upon the fact that the Church is being used to motivate and justify the occupation and war against civilians. The leadership of the Russian Orthodox Church is actively contributing to legitimize the war and the propaganda of the regime. We strongly reject this misuse of Christian faith and tradition. It makes the leadership of the Church complicit in the war. So it's quite a strong statement, I should say. Even other European churches did not dare to use such words with explicit accusations against the Russian Church. Some statements said that the Russian Church somehow does not help to to contain this war, but this is a very explicit statement that accuses actually the Russian Church as complicit in this war. And it's important also that the statement comes from a group of bishops who used to be quite too maybe tolerant to the activities of the Russian Church, including the activities of the Russian Church in the global ecumenical movement. For example, after Russia started its war in 2014, the bishops from this group and other members of the global ecumenical community, particularly the World Council of Churches, preferred not to accuse even Russia as a side of the war of any wrongdoings. In the statements that were published in the wake of the Russian intrusion to Ukraine in 2014, the statements they came up from the World Council of Churches were very ambivalent. They, for example, put on the same footing the presumed Ukrainian nationalism and the Russian nationalism, and they said essentially it's a conflict of two nationalisms. Both sides are to be blamed for what is going on, and as a result, the WCC didn't take any step against the Russian Church. It continued to be like that until recently, even after the war escalated in February 2022. It happened that soon after the war escalated, the most important venue gathering of the World Council of Churches, the General Assembly of the World Council of Churches, was to happen in Karlsruhe in Germany. It was scheduled for the end of August 2022, beginning of September. It was supposed to happen earlier, but because of the pandemic, it was postponed. And well, one could say providentially, it coincided with the escalation of the war in Ukraine. So many expected the General Assembly of the World Council of Churches to address the war in a proper way. Truth needs to be told that the General Assembly produced a statement which is quite good. It explicitly identifies the perpetrator, the Russian Orthodox Church, and calls for peace and condemns violence. At the same time, many expected more drastic measures from the WCC, like, for example, the expulsion of the Russian Orthodox Church from this organization. And it seems that the leadership of the World Council of Churches, people in the Central Committee of the WCC and in other kind of governing bodies of the WCC, preferred not to proceed in this direction, and they tried to preserve the presence of the Russian Church, to the extent that they completely tolerated the presence of some members of the Russian delegation who are really toxic and outrageous, like the former Metropolitan of Klin, Leonid Gorbachev, who is the Russian exarch in Africa, and he is like really like enfant terrible in the Russian Church. He makes postings and comments on the current situation completely against the West, completely in favor of the Russian war and so forth. So he was a senior member of the Russian delegation, and no one gave him a dime about that. It seems that the leadership of the World Council of Churches at the time in Karlsruhe decided to to keep going as it used to be, or as I would put it, to keep the ecumenical business as usual. And this tendency, I believe, is unhelpful. It's what we see, for example, in the statement of the Norwegian bishops, is very different from the policy which was demonstrated quite explicitly in the General Assembly in Karlsruhe, to keep the ecumenical business with the Russians as usual. Well, this policy has been criticized, and before the Karlsruhe General Assembly and after it, some European intellectuals and churches, particularly people from Germany, like German theologians and church figures, they even published an open address to the World Council of Churches and the leadership of EKD, the Evangelical Church of Germany, to reconsider the Russian participation in the WCC. All those addresses, also the appeals came from some prominent figures in the ecumenical movement and global Christianity, such as the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, and others. Those appeals, those addresses were ignored in Karlsruhe, in the General Assembly, and they essentially decided to proceed as it is. Well, there is hope that this policy adopted in Karlsruhe will not continue. With the new leadership of the World Council of Churches, I should mention that the previous leadership was temporarily after the acting director of the World Council of Churches, acting General Secretary, is called General Secretary, Father Ioan Savka, who is a Romanian priest, Orthodox priest, stepped down. The new leadership seems to begin adopting or considering a new policy, which would not be like the policy of business as usual, in the ecumenical matters. And there is hope that the WCC may revise its policies and to make it more adequate, more correspondent with the realities of the war. We should see how this will continue, but certainly it will be important that the churches who are the members of the WCC, especially the churches who really support in many ways with their resources, the World Council of Churches would act and exercise some pressure on the leadership of the WCC. I believe personally that this is really an opportunity for the World Council of Churches and the global ecumenical community to reconsider, to revise many of its policies, and to remove even some obstacles in the ecumenical movement. It has been, since the beginning of the ecumenical movement, the role of the Russian Church has been political. Sometimes in denial the ecumenical movement, and sometimes in supporting the ecumenical movement. For example, when the World Council of Churches was established in Amsterdam in 1948, the Russian Church decided not to participate in it. Moreover, the Russian Church tried to torpedo that establishing meeting in Amsterdam in 1948, and to establish its own network, kind of interchurch network. It had its own council in 1948, to commemorate the 500 years of the Russian autocephaly, and to create a kind of anti-ecumenical front line against, the ecumenical initiatives in the West. Then eventually the Russian Church joined the World Council of Churches in 1961 in New Delhi, but again this was a political step. Khrushchev wanted the Russian Church to participate in the World Council of Churches in order to promote its own agenda, and the Russian Church keeps promoting this political agenda of the Kremlin through the ecumenical organization. So now there is a chance to to remove this residue of the Cold War from the World Council of Churches. If the WCC decides to keep ecumenical business as usual, all those residues will stay within the World Council of Churches. Also, it has been an impediment for the ecumenical movement, some kind of ideological schemes propelled by the Russian Church, like, for example, this counterposition between East and West. Nowadays, the Russian Church stresses the counterposition between the global South and the former colonial powers. Essentially, the Church tries to apply this principle, divide and rule. So the Church promotes this counterposition between the global South and global North, just as it promotes the counterposition between the East and West, and this impedes the work of the World Council of Churches. And nowadays, with the war, if the WCC decides not to discontinue its business as usual with the Russian Church, it's a chance to remove those obstacles, or to minimize at least the tensions stemming from those counterpositions. In the end, in the conclusion, I should say that the global ecumenical movement, its kind of ups and downs, its high points corresponded with the overcoming of the wars. Like the modern ecumenical movement was born in the wake of the World War I. There was an attempt to establish a League of the Churches similar to the League of the Nations in 1920. Then another attempt was made after the World War II. The mentioned General Assembly of the World Council of Churches in Amsterdam, the establishing one, the founding assembly, happened in 1948, as I mentioned, and it reflected exactly the demand for peace, the demand for new international order, if you want, after the World War II, and this boosted, the post-war situation boosted the global ecumenical movement. Nowadays, the war in Ukraine is really, I believe, an opportunity for the global ecumenical movement to reinvigorate itself, even to reinvent itself, and to remove all those obstacles, old diseases, what they call ecumenical fatigue, ecumenical winter, like disinterest of the churches in the ecumenical movement. It's an opportunity for those churches and the global ecumenical movement to make itself cool again, to make itself attractive again. This is an opportunity not to be missed. And if the global ecumenical movement continues the business as usual, this will be a missed opportunity. So that's what I wanted to share with you, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Professor Owen. And right now we've actually made pretty good time, about maybe 2 minutes later than we planned. So fantastic. We have plenty of time for discussion, and in fact, in the comments we already began a rather theoretically dense discussion, which we'll now bring out into voice chat. So I'll read. There were sort of three major themes. One of them was about the idea of the Russian world and the idea of the Ukrainian world, and how they're actually put into practice, through which channels. As Hans-Georg Asmussen asked, how and where the Ruskiy idea being practiced and communicated in Russia in schools, the church, media, and more. And as Giuseppe Maiella asked, where is the Ukrainian svit practiced, and how deeply is this concept understood? The second big theme is about the parallels with the accusation of cults and Satanism in sort of the Russian and Ukrainian practice, and these same arguments being used by the right wing against the left wing in the Western world, in America specifically. And the final is about the sort of the narratology, about how religious and secular elements are used and combined, and how they're instrumental in building particular narratives, and about the cult studies paradigms. Let's start possibly with the Ruskiy Mir. So these are the questions posed to our esteemed panelists. So what are the particular examples of the Ruskiy Mir being practiced today? And what are the particular examples and how widespread is the Ukrainian svit idea? I have a feeling that at least two of the panelists aren't going to agree on that last one, judging from the presentations, but the floor is yours again.
Yes, Liudmila, I just give a short notice that Liudmila might leave soon. So if anyone has extra questions, ideas to discuss, but also be prepared.
Then we should start with Liudmila. So if anybody has questions.
Okay, may I be the first, because I have some problems here, organizational problems. I could be very, very short, because about the comparison, how to implement the Russian world and the Russian and Ukrainian svit. I think that the idea of Russian world is a great idea for Russians, because this idea and this concept, this theory, helps them to understand themselves and to build a very, very hierarchy and understandable model of identity for Russians. And I think that Ukrainian svit, Ukrainskiy svit, could be the same, like opposite to this Russian svit, Russian mir. And if we compare how implemented these two ideas in Russia and Ukraine, in Russia, yes, they have a special program for the schools and even the universities, how to educate the young generation to be a real Russians. What does it mean? In Ukraine, we have no such practice and we have no such ideas, because we are different from Russia. We could not now combine the different parts of our identities to one, like Russian, because we are different from by nationalities, by our religions, by our even regional differences and so on. I think that we need Ukrainian svit, Ukrainskiy svit now for deeply understanding ourselves. And this is only the first step of our developing in this process. And later, maybe we could create something very interesting, lovely, enlightenment, and so on. But I think that we have no the opposition, we have no the answer to Russian mir. How the Vyacheslav Shevchuk answered to the question about what kind of mir world we need to build in Ukraine, how to react to the Russian world. And Svetoslav Shevchuk, he proposes to build our own svit. Not to construct, not to make some simulacre, but they built a real Ukrainian svit without war, with love, with friendship, and many, many others general humanities values, which supported by all normal people.
Right, thank you, Liudmila. Professor Arun, you'd answered quite a bit in the chat before, but would you like to elaborate on what you said about the idea that you're not sure that's quite so popular, or?
Well, yes, it's really it's a big question. It's not an easy question, I believe. I personally prefer to be cautious when talking about the Ukrainian world. I think, given that we as a country, we aspire to become a member of the European family, I don't think we could really fit well into the European community as a Ukrainian world. I wonder if there is a Norwegian world in Europe, or Swedish world, or Dutch world. If there were, Norwegian or Dutch or Lithuanian worlds within the European Union, I doubt it would be sustainable, as a community of nations, as a community of peoples. Well, it depends on how we define, of course, what is the Ukrainian world. So if we perceive the Ukrainian world as a kind of self-sufficient civilization, which mirrors, the Russian civilization, in the mirror, we see the right hand as the left hand and vice versa. So it's just like the opposite to the Russian world, but with very similar features. Then how different are we from the Russians? I mean, the difference is not just to put the right hand in the place of the left hand. The difference is to have a completely different image and substance of what we are. I think we should not perceive ourselves as a kind of different civilization. We have our uniqueness, of course, as every European nation has its own uniqueness and personality, if you want, a possibility to contribute, to the common European goodness, whatever, a common good. And we as a people, I mean, the Ukrainians can do this, certainly, but I'm not sure that as a distant, a separate world, rather as a kind of a nation, a people that shares the same values that other European nations do.
Thank you. Would any of the other panelists or any of the participants like to add something or have questions about this for you?
Yes, I can add something. It's okay.
Yes, please.
Yes. About Professor Hovoron's question, is there a Norwegian world? Is there a Swedish world? I think it's a rather tricky question, because I mentioned in my presentation Francophonia, because that's really a tricky word. If you learn French, it sounds very, very good, but it has also this imperial connotations, and even in the English-speaking world, it's something also you must be suspicious of it, because it's English-speaking world, and the other English-speaking, that is the other English-speaking countries, they are English-speaking, but they are not so good. It's a post-colonial perspective, and the same with Francophonia. I'm not sure of Francophonia, French-speaking world, that is sometimes not France and not Switzerland, but it's let's say Africa. It's other countries. And you must protect them in some way. And also with Ruskiy, it had also these post-colonial implications. Now the implications are purely imperial, but it's difficult to talk about Ukrainian world, Russia world. Yes, we speak about this in Sweden. We talk about Swedish-speaking world or something of that kind, and we must protect them. But we will not use the weapons. That is true. But in France, they will use weapons. So it's also how you see the diaspora. Yes, that was my comment.
Thank you.
Maybe from this perspective, it would be more helpful to coin a different phrase to describe what we mean by the Ukrainian world, because it sounds too Russian. Too many, negative connotations are connected as strings to this notion, especially in the wake of this war. Yeah, well, Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian identity, it's I think it would be a safer way of expressing what we mean. And again, just a small remark, it's really funny, and it's really a paradox regarding the English language being used in the EU. There is no anymore any natively English-speaking country in the EU after Brexit, and still EU uses English language. So it's less. It looks like not so less imperial within EU than it was before the Brexit. So it's well, the use of the English language has been completely kind of more cleaned from those imperial connotations as a result of that.
Right. There is a
of course, Irish. Yeah, they would argue their language
Irish
is
Gaelic.
Well, yeah, Gaelic, no English. Sorry.
Yeah, and Gaelic has been in rather dire states.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think we shall possibly move on to the second big part of the discussion. So the question is about by Michael Straniska. Interesting that right-wing politicians and media personalities in the USA who often sympathize with Putin are also using ideas of Satanists and demons to vilify left-wing and liberal forces in US society. So if Massimo or Sarah would like to sort of expound on the possible sort of parallels or relationships between these two phenomena.
Well, I believe that in the Russian propaganda, the use of Satanism should be examined carefully because it has two different meanings. In a way, it's a very technical meaning, and people like Dworkin or Novopashin really believe that there is an agreement between Satanist organizations in the United States, which are totally far away from these problems. I mean, I'm a scholar of these Satanist organizations. They really have nothing to do with the war in Ukraine or Maidan, but they use Satanism, the sensu stricto, and they really mean the Church of Satan of Anton LaVey, or more recently, the Temple of Satan. And they claim these organizations have an agreement with the US government and the CIA, and now involving also the Ukrainian government, to infiltrate Satanist organizations into Russia, both to demoralize the Russian youth and to carry on sabotage operations. So this sense is very technical. Novopashin or Dworkin, they don't mean Satanism in a metaphysical sense. But on the other hand, when Putin mentioned Satanism or Patriarch Kirill, they may have heard some of these stories, but I believe they also used the word Satanism in a much older meaning, which actually date back to philosophers such as Ivan Ilyin, whose influence on both Putin and Kirill we may discuss, but surely Putin went to Zurich to recover the body of Ivan Ilyin and have it reburied in Moscow with great pomp and circumstance. And if we look at these old Russian nationalists, the West is satanic by definition. And Ilyin described a satanic conspiracy against Russia, whose inspirer is Satan, whose tool is the West. And the West uses three paths to satanize the world and Russia. And one is Western democracy, which is totally not non-universal and surely non-Russian. The other is the gay activists, and the third is the cults. But of course, Ilin was writing between World War I and World War II, so for him the cults were anthroposophy and theosophy. That it was surely not Scientology, didn't exist at the time. So in this sense, when Putin uses the name of the West is the empire of Satan in a sort of a metaphysical way. And here, of course, we can find some connection with the Trump movement, because the Trump movement would agree that the West is deeply corrupted, perhaps even our interpretation of democracy is corrupted, but surely the LGBT activists and anything which goes counter the traditional Christian values is by the definition satanic. Just a later comment, last comment, is that the two meaning, the technical and the non-technical, sometime of course connect. For instance, during the first Trump electoral campaign, it was alleged that Hillary Clinton was in touch with real Satanist groups through her advisor John Podesta and Marina Abramovich, who is not a Satanist either. I have written an article about it. She can be called a New Ager, but not Satanist. But anyway, Satanist is used in a very cavalier way for non-Christian religious or spiritual movements. So sometimes those who use Satanism in a metaphysical sense, Satan is a metaphor or the metaphysical source for all which runs counter a certain idea of a traditional civilization, so the gays, the left, etc. Sometimes this is connected with really existing Satanist organizations. But surely in Russia we see the two things. Something say the Church of Satan of LaVey is training people to do sabotage in Russia, and some other people will say Satan is the metaphysical root of the Western opposition to Russia.
Thank you. If we have, as we do have actually, we don't have that much time, I think I'll just move on with the next questions, because I missed Richard Croft's question about, and I think this one would be best posed to Per-Arne Bodin. So the question was, Ruskiy, the harmony, is a reaction to other social influences. Was that primarily church-led, nobility-led, or cultural alarm to a loss of Russian identity? Is the fear individualization? And is it, or what's the main motivator? Theology, economics, or preserving culture?
And did I understand it correctly that the reasons for the development of Ruskiy Mir and let's, for one moment, I have to think. Did I understand the question correctly? I did not hear you so good.
Yeah, sorry, let me repeat that. So
yes.
Ruskiy Mir as a reaction to other social influences, was
yes.
that primarily church-led, nobility-led, or was it just a general cultural alarm to a loss of Russian identity? What is the driving fear? Is it individualization?
Yes. First, Ruskiy Mir, that is as a term, it was used in the by Shedrovitsky, and in that context, it was an attempt to reunite the diaspora with Russia, and in that case, I will say that it could be used to say that the diaspora, it was it was the real Russia. And then it would be used in another context very quickly. It was to protect Russian-speaking people in the states of the former Soviet Union. So it had a development, and first it was even an economical question for Shchedorovitsky than 20 years ago. He's an economist, and he thought that it would be to support the Russian economy. So it's complicated, but the fact is that now it's used only in this imperial meaning.
I find that very interesting, like the way that originally it was the diaspora that was the sort of saviors and preservers of Russian culture, and now they're sort of the agents of Russian culture abroad. So the center of activity has moved.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. All right, and we do have two more sort of comments. So three more comments. So Michael Straniska asked if the theology that Putin and Medvedev was developing, can we really call it theology, or would it rather be sort of demonology?
Yeah, I think I'm supposed to answer this question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's again how we understand. Well, technically speaking, it's theology. Even demonology is a part of theology. At the same time, I think what they are speaking about is not really a subject for theological reflections. It's more a subject for religious studies. You know, religious studies, they study all sorts of human religiosity, not a particular tradition. Theology is usually focused on a particular tradition, right? Even though both Putin and Medvedev, they make references to a particular tradition, Eastern Christianity, Orthodox tradition. I think what they promote, a kind of religion they promote, it's only superficially by its name related to Eastern Christianity, but in its essence, it's far away from the tradition. It's really a parasitism on the tradition. That's why they are really a subject of religious studies, and not theology. Also, what I wanted to mention in this regard. Today's date, 24th of February, is probably similar from the perspective of religion. After 9/11, after the terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers, the attitude in the United States, at least, but also globally, to religion, even in the secular circles, changed. A few days after 9/11, Jürgen Habermas made his famous address to the German publishers, where he coined the notion of post-secularity. Essentially, he suggested a dialogue, a conversation between religion and secularity, being himself a secularist, being himself like a Marxist, and really a leader of secularism. He suggested this kind of dialogue, and this was a new wave, new attitude to religion. Of course, people understood that we are talking about a deviation of Islam. It's not really Islam per se, it's a misinterpretation of Islam. That's why they realized that we need to study Islam better. We need to study religion per se better, and we need to acknowledge the role of religion in our societies. As a result, the kind of religious studies flourished, especially in the American universities, and a completely new, field of studies was created. I believe that in the wake of 24th of February, we could have a similar wave of interest to Eastern Christianity. Yeah, we are now troublemakers. We have created a situation. I mean, I'm talking about all those who affiliate themselves with Eastern Christianity. Some of us have supported this war. I mean, people who make appeals to Eastern Christianity, they support the war, like Putin or Medvedev. But they clearly misuse, they clearly distort the tradition. And in order to tackle this distortion, we need really to focus on the on this tradition to differentiate between the genuine tradition and the abuses of this tradition. That's why I envisage really a new wave of theological studies and religious studies globally in connection with this war.
Well, that's practically an answer to Silvio Chibu's question. I'm not sure if you had the time to see it and were directing your answer towards him. You read the question, right?
No, if you could help with that.
Yes. So what do you think that would be some concrete measures that the WCC could take regarding the Russian Church? Moreover, given the current tribalism that characterizes the theology of the Orthodox Church and the lack of interest towards ecumenical dialogue that some churches show, for instance, the Armenian Church, how do you think that such an issue could be addressed in order for the revival of the ecumenical interest to occur?
Yeah, good. It's a very good question. Well, I believe that there are two wrong dilemmas regarding the Russian Church and the attitude of the WCC to the Russian Church. The first one is to just to leave everything as it is, the business as usual, the policy that has been endorsed in Karlsruhe effectively. Another attitude is just to punish the Russian Church for wrongdoings of its leadership. I think this is also not a healthy attitude. It's not about punishing. What needs to be done is about helping the church to change its mind, and the change of mind in the Eastern Christian tradition, at least, it translates as metanoia, the repentance. The church needs to repent for what it has done, and the WCC has to encourage in different ways the repentance, the change of mind, the metanoia and catharsis of the Russian Church, and all the measures undertaken within the global ecumenical movement need to kind of be directed at changing the Russian Church, not punishing the Church, but changing its mind, even if you want, in some sense, as a kind of reformation for this Church that is quite urgent. And that would be my answer. What kind of measures should be taken in order to change the Russian Church? That's a different discussion. What practical measures should be done? It needs to be discussed within the global ecumenical community, within the WCC, and I hope this discussion will happen soon.
All right, and that's actually us about out of time. There were a couple more very short comments about possibly calling this narratology, and very new comment about somebody accusing somebody of being satanic themselves. But at this point, we're out of time. So unless somebody has something incredibly important to add, so I think it's about time to close the seminar. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for this very comprehensive overview of the question of the sort of major sort of questions and description of the current of the impact of religion on the current on the current war of Russia and Ukraine, and on the way religion is interacting with all this, on the way religion is interacting with ideology, on what sort of religious narratives are drawn into ideology, and how this sort of forms the background of the current war. Thank you everybody for attending. We're all the organizers are all very thrilled to see this turnout. Tomorrow there's going to be quite a few more papers, and specifically on some of the questions asked in the chat, specifically the question on Islam and Ukraine. There's going to be a separate paper on that. And we hope to see you all there. And we hope that this panel has been of interest to you. I've seen people saying they learned a lot. Well, we did our best. So thank you for coming. Thank you for speaking. And see you everyone tomorrow.